Yeah, Dani Dennis-Sutton, Trebor Pena, and Kyron Hudson were the stars of the day against Nevada, but these other players are being overlooked with their solid performances, including another true freshman not named Chaz Coleman.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Thank you to the everydayers out there. We are your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Well, Ohio State certainly proved quite a bit against Texas. A win over the number one team in the country. Does that mean the Buckeyes are still going to be too much for Penn State this season? We're going to discuss that later on in the show. There is one true freshman that we have really not discussed collectively. I'm talking media, fans, coaches have not talked about this true freshman that is being overlooked, but he played the most in Saturday's contest against Nevada. But this group of players stepped up at positions of need that we're going to focus on in this show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So let's talk about those players, especially at positions that were characterized as weaknesses, but Penn State starting to solidify them. I know it's against Nevada. And Dani Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, A.J. Harris had great performances. But we know this. I want to talk about guys that are flying under the radar here or are not getting enough recognition out of the weekend, starting with Amare Campbell. Now, Amare Campbell is getting due recognition, but maybe not necessarily enough, because this is a player that came in and got himself into a starting Mike linebacker battle. Well, I think that's going to be settled sooner rather than later. Now, Dom DeLuca's still going to play, but Amare Campbell set the tone physically. That's important. You see the athleticism. It just jumps out right on the football field. Campbell led the team in tackles despite not playing a full day's work. But Campbell, to come in immediately, establish himself as a key player, be somebody that, is just in Jim Knowles' defense. Now, James Franklin pointed this out, that all things were equal here because it is a new defensive system. But Dom DeLuca has been here for a long time. Tony Rojas is going into his third season, and Campbell, who's in his first year at Penn State, has already established himself, and somebody that transferred in late. He didn't have winter workouts to build the camaraderie. He didn't have that time to learn Jim Knowles' playbook the same way that DeLuca, Rojas, and all the other linebackers did. No, Amare Campbell comes in, and he brings that physical prowess with him. He led North Carolina in tackles. He's a tackling machine. This is absolutely something he can do for Penn State, and he can get pressure when you ask him to. One of the better traits about Amare Campbell is he's not just good at stopping the run. If you need him to go on a specialty blitz, which is what Jim Knowles is going to ask him to do, he can do it. Campbell had 6.5 sacks at North Carolina a season ago. But now in a system that is really going to bring out his talent, a system that is also not going to have him be worried about this player and that player and being overly responsible for other teammates, if I'm making sense here. Everybody else is self-sufficient, so Amare Campbell can just focus on his job, his assignment, and not worrying about what's this player doing with a North Carolina defense that is really lacking. So at Penn State, I expect him now. I said Tony Rojas would lead the team in tackles. It's going to be Amare Campbell. And I know that's just after one game here, but Campbell impressed a lot. And like I said, set the tone physically for this Penn State defense, and a much needed addition when it was just Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca that Jim Knowles was trusting. And now you immediately add Amare Campbell into that mix. I also want to mention Tony Rojas because he was one of the highest graded players on Penn State's defense from this game. Solid game again. In a small sample size here, which we're going to say a lot because not everybody played a full game here except for select players. But with that being said, Rojas still did a lot of damage early in that game. And alongside Campbell, with that, it's the speed. It's Rojas's speed to be able to close those lanes, close those gaps the second that they open up. He can catch up to a player if he misses a step. And I'm not saying he did that against Nevada, but he has such great recovery speed. I mean, Tony Rojas running a sub 4.4 as a linebacker. I mean, Dan Connor said it. He's like, I don't know how these players are so fast these days. These linebackers are so fast. The athleticism is off the charts, and Rojas is that. I want to mention another position group. Let's pivot, because Penn State, yes, at linebacker, getting Amare Campbell to go alongside Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca, but at defensive tackle, because that's the conversation that we had on this show for a lot of the offseason. What are they going to do at defensive tackle past Zane Durant? Alonzo Ford is coming back from injury. Well, two players in particular had really good days. Now, I know it's against Nevada. It's a small sample size. But Enai White stepping up after converting over from defensive end to defensive tackle, and then Xavier Gilliam, who we heard a lot about this offseason from James Franklin, and then eventually Jim Knowles got into the conversation because they were, and then of course Neon Barnes is going to talk very highly of players that are standing out in his position group. But when it works its way up to the defensive coordinator and the head coach, that's what's telling. And I think Gilliam lived up to that praise. I think Enai White, somebody who came in with a lot of uncertainty and then moves and then changes positions from defensive end to defensive tackle. This is huge for a defensive line that needs it, because defensive end becomes a massive question mark. That becomes a concern, which we're going to talk about more with the freshmen in this upcoming segment here, because Chaz Coleman did show some flashes of potential, but work is still cut out for him. Kemaju, and even the second-year players in Jalen Harvey and Malachi Williams. However, coming back to the middle of the defensive line, the interior of the defensive line, Enai White making select plays. And what this does, okay, well, it's against weaker competition in Nevada. Well, not everybody had the best game, and I'm not going to condemn them and say that, well, they can't play or they shouldn't play, or that they're not going to bounce back from their performance. But I think Enai White can build off of this performance. And the same thing with Xavier Gilliam to continue to increase their reps. I mean, Gilliam was talked about as a potential starter, was pushing Alonzo Ford for a starting spot. I think that has to do with the fact that Ford, because he had a really good season last year before the injury. So I think that just has to do with him getting back up to speed. Maybe he's not quite 110%, and you know that, and you notice it with limited playing time. So to have Gilliam as a little more reassurance, to see Enai White responding to the change in position very well, that's what's telling about it, is that it's not totally over. It's not too far past Enai White to pick up on defensive tackle and to actually flourish in this position, but it builds out the depth chart. What happens past Zane Durant and Alonzo Ford? Well, now we get some clarity. Ty Blanding had a solid day. I don't think to the extent of these two. Maybe the coaches would disagree. But now you're starting to see the defensive tackle depth actually gain some clarity here when there was nothing going into the throughout most of the offseason. And then in the secondary. Now, secondary, this is why I saved this group for last, because it's not a position of need. Cornerback is loaded. A.J. Harris, Elliott Washington, Davian Collins. But these players just continue to step up and add to it. You have true freshman Darius Dixon. Save him for the second segment. But Antoine Belgrave-Shorter and Kenny Woseley played a ton. They played the most snaps out of anybody on defense. And for good reason. This is good because it only adds to Penn State's strength. Where Zion Tracy goes into that game questionable, and Kenny Woseley, yeah, we're ready to go and play him right out of the gate in that slot cornerback spot. Antoine Belgrave-Shorter, a second-year player that we weren't really talking about in general. It was Dejan Lane. It was King Mack at that safety spot. And Belgrave-Shorter becomes the starter. So for Penn State to already build off of a massive strength with its secondary, and they run, again, a 4-2-5, and this is a true 4-2-5. So to see ABS and Woseley step up the way they did, they have skyrocketed as second-year players. Their value to the team, their statuses, Penn State shows that they trust them. I do think week one was used, again, to build leverage, to build momentum. that not necessarily only about, hey, we trust them, but also we want to see what you can do. We trust you enough to prove to us that you are competent, that you are capable against better opponents down the road. Oregon, the Big Ten Conference in general. Ohio State's a little further out at the beginning of November, but you get my point, is that the competition is going to significantly increase going from Nevada and FIU to, Oregon. So Belgrave-Shorter and Woseley getting a lot of playing time is a positive indication that they are on the right track. And then as Dejon Lane played a good bit too. You still have King Mack. And then as Zion Tracy continues to progress, again, he was dealing with injuries this offseason, and Tracy is the bona fide starter, but now you have that insurance behind them. Belgrave-Shorter being a starter, Woseley being a capable player that can rotate in frequently with Tracy, it only adds to Penn State's defense and what Jim Knowles wants to do. Well, when I mentioned defensive back here, that's going to be my hint. You're probably thinking, okay, if it's not Chaz Coleman and it's not Darius Dixon, then who is the freshman that we're not talking about? Well, I'm going to tell you on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by The Game. Quick question for all of you college football fans out there. If you could go back in time and sit front row at your school's biggest rivalry game, what hat would you be wearing? Yes, I said hat. For me, it would be The Game. These aren't just hats. They're the same vintage styles that fans actually wore back in the 80s and the 90s. And guess what? They are still going for the same price that they did back then. When you use code LOCKED ON, that is code LOCKED ON, and that will get you a vintage hat for $16.99. Head over to thegamecaps.com. That is thegamecaps.com. Grab your team's classic bar or retro circle design and use code LOCKED ON for an exclusive discount, because legends wear the game. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. College football is back, as we all know it, and we all couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing else like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans, back to all of you. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can pull up Game Time, and in just a couple of taps, you'll see those amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. Penn State football tickets are available on Game Time, and if you've never been to Beaver Stadium, they have a point of view feature from all of the seats in the stadium so that you're not second guessing yourself. You know what your POV is going to look like ahead of time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets, college football tickets, with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. And before we get back to the podcast, we have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from all of you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer questions about our advertising. All you got to do is go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered in for a chance to win one of 10, 100. That's right, $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, over at lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. You can also find the link down in the description, down in the show notes. Thanks so much for helping us out. And still to come, Ohio State proved a lot against Texas, even though that was a pretty dull and boring game. But we're going to talk about that to wrap up this show. I want to focus on, yes, this one true freshman that I'm alluding to, but just the true freshmen overall. They're here to stay. And no, their performances weren't dominant. They were far from perfect. Chaz Coleman, Yvonne Kemaju. I'm going to focus on the defensive ends here mostly. Kobe Howard, playing a little bit, but not a whole lot in this case. Darius Dixon did actually get a lot of plays like Chaz Coleman did, and like this one other freshman, who's actually his defensive back counterpart too. But these guys overall still impressed me. Chaz Coleman showed those flashes of potential. The buzz that he's generated over the course of training camp is legit. He has those natural pass rushing moves, and maybe they're not even natural. Maybe there's something that he's just picked up on. I think the athleticism is natural, but you can see the influence of Deion Barnes, some spin moves, just some twitchiness overall. It's there, and you can see why they're playing him early. But Coleman, Kemaju, the other second-year defensive ends, like a Jalen Harvey and Malachi Williams, they're just not as savvy. That's the inexperience that we've been so accustomed to with the former star counterparts. I mean, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, obviously Abdul Carter, just recently here, Micah Parsons, and I know he never played defensive end, but you get my point. Of these star players that are just so disruptive around the line of scrimmage. That's what they have in common. Chaz Coleman can get there. Yvonne Kemaju can get there. I believe Jalen Harvey and Malachi Williams can. They just need the reps. It's going to take time. Remember, Abdul Carter, when he started out at defensive end last season against West Virginia, first few weeks of the season didn't really have that great of a performance. And immediately, Penn State fans, not everybody, but Penn State fans, a collection of them were calling for Carter to be moved back to linebacker. And they were adamant about it. This isn't working. Scrap the plan. Move him to linebacker. We need him at linebacker. And he ended up becoming a top 3 NFL draft pick and objectively the best edge defender in all of college football last season. So Penn State knows that you need the reps. That's the only way you're going to get better. Abdul Carter just needed time for the switch to officially flip from linebacker to defensive end. Chaz Coleman is a true freshman who has not played a lot of defensive end, and the progress that he has made, that's the thing. The athleticism, it's always been there. Just this natural ability, just make plays and be dominant in whatever sport he focuses on. Now that he is eating and breathing and sleeping football nonstop, you can already see the progress that he's made and why Penn State is already ready to put him on the football field. So I say continue to throw them in the fire. And Penn State knows this. I'm trying to reiterate it. That is why you were seeing Coleman play so much in week 1, because he has flashed that potential. It's the same thing with Kemaju. Now let me point you in the direction of that one other player. So I wanted to talk about, because I say, hey, defensive ends, yeah, they're a concern, because how soon are they going to be ready? But that's why I reiterate, just keep playing them as much as you can, because you can win against FIU and Villanova. But against Oregon, you got to have them ready, especially with the uncertainty around Zariah Fisher. But it all fits here in this segment because those guys are true freshmen. Darius Dixon, solid game, nothing to write home about. But another player in particular in that secondary, Jahmir Joseph. I've saved it for a while now, but Jahmir Joseph, we have not really mentioned his name, period. On this show, the coaches, this is somebody that has truly flown under the radar to, the element of surprise. Joseph ended up playing the most snaps out of any true freshman in that game against Nevada. 4-star defensive back, one of the top prospects out of the state of New Jersey in this class of 2025. Darius Dixon got all the praise and the recognition, which was due, right? Dixon deserved all of that. But then Joseph playing the most snaps. Now, it's granted by one. It's 23 to 22 of Coleman and Dixon, respectively. But of all the true freshmen, it was Jahmir Joseph that had the most playing time of all of them. Secondary's already loaded, because I understand somebody like Dixon pushing his way into the fold where he's so good that you just can't keep him off of the football field. But then maybe being a little more strategic. Okay, we have some other guys in the secondary here that maybe we could redshirt them and save them. And that might ultimately be the plan for Jahmir Joseph. But there's definitely, again, it's the same thing that I said about Coleman and Kemaju. There is a reason they are playing the amount of snaps that they are already playing. And that's because, same thing goes for Belgrave-Shorter and Kenny Woseley. They want to see what they can do. When you run a 4-2-5, you need all the depth that you can get. And I think Penn State's depth depth is as solid as it is in the secondary. I've already said that before, but it just continues to add to it. So you have Kenny Woseley step up. You have Antoine Belgrave-Shorter step up as those safeties. And then Darius Dixon make a name for himself, push into it, and immediately be greenlit. Have that green light status as a true freshman to burn his red shirt immediately without questioning it. Now Jahmir Joseph is starting to put his name into that conversation potentially. Again, not a lot of discourse around him, whether that questions from the media, maybe that's our fault, okay? But the coaches not really saying much here, but actions speak louder than words. And Joseph, watching him selectively, got in later in the game, and that's where, again, his responsibilities were a little more crucial. They were more important because he was out there on the boundary, on an island. Thought coverage was good. I thought he looked like a veteran cornerback. He didn't show too much inexperience. He didn't look the part of, this is the same thing with Darius Dixon. He didn't look like a true freshman necessarily. He looks like somebody that, hey, he's been doing this for quite some time. Again, not to the extent of a star player. I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. Let's take this a step further, though. Jahmir Joseph and Darius Dixon, there is going big plans at Penn State for both of them. Is this another pending lockdown corner? Because Darius Dixon's already on that timeline where year 2, he's only going to get more playing time, more respect within the defense. But do you have that with Jahmir Joseph too? With Dixon on one side of the football field and then Joseph on the other side. You might have, instead of just a situation where it's Joey Porter Jr. and then a strong supporting cast, you might have 2 superstar corners on both sides of the football field. Good luck throwing the football. If these guys truly reach their potential. Dixon and Joseph are already showing that they could be strong assets for the future and then some. 2 individual star players on each side of the defense in the secondary that's going up against teams that run 3 wide receiver sets consistently, 4 wide receiver sets consistently, and you have the 2 boundaries locked down. If they stick around for 3 to 4 years, you could see that superstar dynamic duo actually come to fruition here with Darius Dixon and Jahmir Joseph. Now let's go to Ohio State. Ohio State surprised me. I got to eat my words. Penn State, though. Are they going to be able to do it now with what we've seen from the Buckeyes? Are they going to get that win for the first time in 10 years? Well, we're going to talk about it next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Rougiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiet Ready. Rougiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rougiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under the tongue and kicks in fast. On average, in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rougiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rougiet.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege to get 15% off today. That is RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege using promo code LockedOnCollege for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiet website for full safety information. Hey, props to all of you that called it, that Ohio State was going to beat this Texas team. I didn't think they had enough to go up against the Longhorns. And we're going to break this game down too, but how it affects Penn State. Are the Buckeyes still going to be too much for the Nittany Lions? Well, the Buckeyes certainly surprised me because I was not expecting them to beat Texas. I thought the Longhorns would win comfortably, and it was Ohio State that did. Well, at least, Texas tried to mount a comeback. Okay, they weren't playing from behind, and Ohio State led for the entirety of the game and by 2 scores. But it was because of the defense Arch Manning is not bad. Play calling certainly didn't help him. He had a bad game because of Ohio State's defense. Ohio State's defense is still elite. Now, I think the front seven needs to show me a little more, because the Longhorns still got theirs on the ground, but it is the secondary that's so strong, so stout, they're able to hold their own that you can focus more resources on trying to just, again, be physical, and Ohio State's defense still is that. But did they take a little bit of a step back? It doesn't seem like it at this point in time. Again, that was the number one team in the country that they won convincingly against. It's week one. Hey, let's overreact to it, right? But thank goodness that Penn State has picked up those 3 wide receivers from the transfer portal. Quality wide receivers, may I remind you, based on what we saw from Pena and Hudson, and in due time, Devontae Ross as well. You get that depth boost from Denmark, Tyser Denmark and Kobe Howard. You're going to need it. Because like I said, Ohio State's secondary with Caleb Downs, Igbenison, and then you add in a player like Matthews Jr. Okay, now the Buckeyes really don't have as much turnover as it seems. And then, like I said, they can focus more on the front seven. Johnny Manziel, this is a fun example because Johnny Manziel, hey, he played college football, he played pro football. I respect anybody that's played the sport professionally, their opinion, whether they're right or wrong, I'm still going to listen to them because they did it. Johnny Manziel brought up an excellent point about Matt Patricia, with Patricia taking over as the defensive coordinator at Ohio State. And he says, this guy was planning game plans against Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Brees, and then facing Tom Brady on a daily basis in practice. This college level stuff is probably easy for Patricia. This is easy stuff. Confuse Arch Manning, show one look and then flip to another, going up against NFL players, NFL coaching staffs on a week-by-week basis. And I know it's so now we see hindsight's 2020, of course, but it's easy to dunk on him because of the stint he had with the Philadelphia Eagles or never materializing as a head coach. He was a pretty good defensive coordinator once upon a time before the Detroit Lions, but that was so long ago that did he lose it? Did he lose that ability? Doesn't seem like it. So this college level stuff is easy for Patricia. I am now sold on Matt Patricia as the defensive coordinator, and that's not an overreaction. That shouldn't be an overreaction. This wasn't a dominant performance against Nevada, right? A group of 6 school that the team that you are rooting for is miles ahead of where that team is. This is Texas. This is a college football title contender that Matt Patricia had shut down. Oh, Arch Manning's bad. No, Manning had a bad game because of the scheme that Patricia put together with that Ohio State defense. Manning's a former 5-star prospect. There is 5-star talent all across the board with that Texas team. 7 points. 7 points. Now, granted, this game was close. This game was close between Ohio State and Texas. A goal line stand was truly the difference. I think that Arch Manning really did have a bad game. I don't think Steve Sarkisian and that offensive play calling really helped them out. But that's the chess. That's the back and forth that Matt Patricia was coaching circles, scheming circles around Texas's offensive game plan, and they had no answer for it. Am I changing my pick, though? With Penn State and Ohio State, I've gone on the record, and I said that Penn State can beat this Ohio State team. And I think that Penn State will beat this Ohio State team. I'm not changing it at this point in time. I still think Penn State can and will win that game. And I've always said that this is a toss-up. I've never argued that, Penn State is so much better than the Buckeyes this season. No, it's the difference in, hey, veteran signal caller versus a first-year starter, first-year offensive coordinator and play caller. Changes in the defensive system that we are now seeing really don't matter as much as they did going through the offseason because Ohio State proved it can win rock fights and not just get into what I thought would be, okay, let's outscore the other opponent. We got Jeremiah Smith, we got Max Clare, we added CJ Donaldson from West Virginia. James Peoples is a promising running back, former 5-star quarterback. Let's just try to outscore everybody. No, that's not the case. They're probably going to try to hold opponents and get into these rock fights until the offense materializes. I'm not buying into the fact that Ohio State's offense isn't going to get better or won't be better at any point in time. This team's going to be number one. They should be number one in the latest rankings because not only of what they did against Texas, but that as of right now is the defending national champion and that win over the Longhorns. They are the number one team in the country. The offense is the one that needs the catching up to do. And eventually they will because they have Jeremiah Smith, because they have 3 other future NFL pass catchers. Julian Sayin is just starting out his collegiate career. He's in year 2, but first year starting. And Brian Hartline is only going to settle in as a play caller. That's not ideal for Penn State, but Penn State has that same counter to it. We saw what they did in week 1 with Trebor Pena and Kyron Hudson. You're going to get Devontae Ross into the equation. You're going to be able to, the passing game, that is the base level. That is only the first iteration of what we've seen of this Penn State offense, and they performed well. Could they have been better? Absolutely. But that's what I mean. Like Ohio State, Penn State is only to get better with its new assets as well within this team. That's what we're going to do. That's where we're going to wrap things up here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out this episode. Thank you to the everydayers. If you are not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts, as we are going to preview Florida International, continue to talk about takeaways from practice, from game day itself. All of your favorite Penn State sports teams are right here daily, whether it is Penn State football, which we're right now in the heart of, but wrestling, recruiting, basketball, we'll talk about it all here daily on Locked On Nittany Lions. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We have another big moment with the Locked On Podcast Network to share with all of you college football fans. Locked On and Fire TV are proud to present College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 is leading the conversation alongside two-time AP Coach of the Year, Gary Patterson. That's right, Gary Patterson is a part of this squad, and former college star Jesse Holley, and Locked On's local experts, of course. A college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV.